welcome to A Wild New Work. This is a place where we listen to the land, to the ancestors, and to the wisdom that still resides within us so that we can bring an old and sturdy strength into the present moment. I'm Megan Leatherman, and I'm your host today. Hello, friend, and welcome back to the show. I hope you really enjoyed the last episode of Peasant Summer and that you're looking forward to this week too on the work of summer and what labor was like for peasants in the Middle Ages. I hope it inspires you to relate to your own energy and efforts in a new way. In case you didn't listen to the last episode or need a reminder, these 3 episodes are part of a longer series I did for Eagle Creek this summer. There are 8 episodes in Peasant Summer, but it's my joy to share these first 3 with you in the hopes that they are replenishing and rejuvenating on their own. If you would like to access the full series, you can become a member of Eagle Creek at awildnewwork.com/eagle-creek. I also want to remind you that there is a summer resources page on my website with some free resources to deepen your learning and support this summer, and you can check that out at awildnewwork.com. And there are also a series of events coming up this autumn that you might be interested in. I'm teaching a class on ancestor speak and how to communicate with your ancestors. And then I'm holding 2 larger containers this autumn. The first is Meant for More, which starts September 30th, which is a vocational guidance small group for those who are ready to make meaningful change in their working lives. And then I will be teaching another series of Weaving with the Ancestors that begins on October 20th. And you can learn more about all of those at awildnewwork.com/events. I hope you love this second episode of Peasant Summer. May it be the medicine that you need today. Hi, friend, and welcome back to Peasant Summer. I hope that you loved the first week of our journey here and that you're looking forward to today's discussion about work and labor among the European peasantry in the Middle Ages. I hope you'll settle in or do whatever might make this time feel sweet to you. And I'd like to start by taking us back in our imaginations to the midsummer gathering that we ended last week's recording with. So imagining that we are in a medieval village together and it's the summer solstice and the day is very long, but the sun is starting to set now. Maybe it's golden hour or the sun has even dropped below the horizon. The air is warm. We can smell food cooking on the fire. Everyone has crowns of flowers or green leaves on their heads, maybe garlands around their necks. Everyone has washed and cleaned and is ready to enjoy themselves together with the land and with each other this evening. And the work of the day thus far before this festive gathering has been the work of making life and home. Some of us worked in the fields to cultivate our crops. Some of us have taken care of the animals today or made cheese or butter. Some of us may have worked in a forge. Some of us may have rested today. And all of that is done and complete. And we're here to really enjoy life, enjoy each other on this midsummer's evening. And there's no rigidity around time. There are no clocks. So we will be out here for as long as we'd like in the waning sunlight around the fires. And the work of tomorrow can wait. We'll wake up perhaps with the sun or at a time that's natural for us. And we will again make life. We will do the labor of cultivating food, processing food, We will perhaps clean in our homes or go to our trade, but we will do so at an unhurried pace because it's a very special day today. It's a very special time of year when we can relax in the knowing that there's plenty of food, there's plenty of warmth and material that we need, and there's plenty of support in our community. So we will truly enjoy ourselves this evening. So let's begin by talking about what work consisted of for peasants in the Middle Ages. It depended on whether you were a serf and, were not wholly autonomous over your time, or whether you were a free person and had autonomy over your time. So if you were a serf, you would labor on your own land and in your own home. So you would do the work of, growing crops on your own little plot of land. You would tend to perhaps a couple of animals that you had make home, and then you would also be obligated to work on the Lord's land 2 to 3 days a week, depending on the time of year. In some places, that day's work lasted until noon, unless the Lord provided dinner or the lunchtime meal, in which case there may be an additional afternoon shift. But if lunch was not provided, the work would not continue. If you were a free person, so not a serf, not obligated to pay in service to the land, to the Lord, you would work on your own land. So you may have a larger plot of land. You may have like day laborers who are working with you or for you to cultivate your land. You may have an additional source of income, such as selling wool, or perhaps one of your family members made ale that they would sell, and you would pay rent to the Lord in the form of coin or sometimes in the form of labor or excess crops. Some people who were free also had a trade, so they would make their home, they would cultivate food on their own plot of land, but they may also work as, a blacksmith or a baker or as a dairymaid. But all peasants, even if they also had a trade, were farmers, essentially. All people were in relationships somehow to cultivating, growing, and harvesting their food. And agriculture as a form of feeding ourselves is very intensive. It's labor intensive compared to hunter-gatherer lifestyles, which are much less labor intensive, but can also not always provide as many calories. So there's trade-offs, but by and large, from what I have read and listened to, the hunter-gatherer lifestyle in which a community is foraging for food, hunting for food, maybe they're lightly cultivating some, special plants in the forest or in the meadow as food, but that kind of a lifestyle provides the calories that people need and an abundance of leisure and rest time. Whereas agriculture is necessary in order for civilization to exist because agriculture can provide a lot of food for a lot of people, but it also requires a lot of people, aka peasants, 80 to 90% of the population. It requires that a lot of people are working very hard so that a few people can have all the food they need and do other things, such as, being in the clergy or being in the nobility or in the knighthood. So agriculture and civilization sort of necessitate one another, and it is a labor-intensive way to live. And peasants were in the mix of that. The work for peasants in the Middle Ages was absolutely seasonal. Work was tied to the cycles of the land because agriculture was like at the very center of life at this time. So if you were a serf and obligated to work on the Lord's land for part of the time, then you would work in alignment with the seasons, and sometimes you would work a lot. So, in the period between, like, I think it was August 8th or so to the end of September, in this like harvest window, peasants would be working perhaps 3 days a week, even up to 5 days a week. And sometimes in that, depending on the place and the time, many times everyone in the village was working on the harvest in that period. So not just serfs, but also free people who the Lord obligated to help out with the harvest. So that's a lot of work on the Lord's land, but then you also have your own crops, your own land that needs to be harvested in time. So that was a really busy window, about a month to 6 weeks. And one of the things that I think is interesting about this is that it's a limited time period in which things are very busy. And the Lord was obligated. One of the books I read said that it was like an ancient contract between the lords and the laborers, that the Lord had to provide a feast many times, many feasts in this harvest period to feed the workers and, honor the labor that they were devoting to this land and to this practice. And people would not show up or be very displeased if a lord was cheap about the bread that he provided or the meat or, vegetables that were provided. The people were very scrupulous about what they expected in these harvest feasts. So the harvest was kind of the peak level of activity among the village, among the peasants. And then things would wane. So perhaps you're sowing winter crops. Maybe over the winter you're fixing your tools, the plow, the other tools that you're using for farming. And then come, spring, you are absolutely out there plowing, planting, weeding, and then another harvest cycle would come. And this cycle of agricultural work is really present in a lot of the manuscripts and art from this time. There's a special type of art called the labors of the months, in which wealthy nobility would commission these paintings, these illuminations, either in like biblical texts or in their own kind of personal commissioned manuscript. And an artist would paint these kind of idyllic scenes depicting the peasantry at the work of the month. So for each month, you would have often a corresponding zodiac sign. So the zodiacs are part of it. So in the month of, let's say, June or Cancer, you would see an image, a painting of the hay harvest, let's say, like in Southern Europe or in France. In other places where it's not ready to harvest in June quite yet, you would see a painting of sheep being sheared and weeding happening in the fields. And I read an article on these labors of the months, and it was a critical look at these not as true snapshots of what it was like for the peasantry, but as a way for the nobility to kind of idealize a dutiful peasantry and, look how beautiful it is. Look how kind of lucky they are to be doing this work. And, it may or may not have been the case that it was that idyllic or beautiful, but the labors of the months do give us a picture into what people were doing all throughout the year, whether it's, harvesting certain plants, letting the pigs out to forage, resting or, fixing their tools. So you might, if you're interested, you could look up the labors of the months and see what you notice about what people were doing among the peasantry in these times in the agricultural cycle. For most of the year, for most people, work was part-time. Work outside the home, that is. So, this is a really important difference between us now and our peasant forebears. So, work outside of the home did exist, of course, especially if you were a serf, you were working at least 2 days a week, probably, sometimes less, sometimes a little more, but it sounds like 2 days a week was kind of a standard, if not heavy obligation. But everyone understood that you had your own home to make, your own food to grow, your own land to cultivate. So, apart from work you did outside the home, whether it was as a part-time blacksmith or part-time tanner, the rest of the time you worked on your own plot of land or in your own homestead or working on your own, clothing. And if there were things that you couldn't provide yourself, you may go to the market one day a week and procure items that again, couldn't make yourself. If you were not a serf, you may not work on the Lord's land at all, just yours. You're just paying rent and taxes, that's true. But by and large, your time is just spent making your own home and your own life. The work for these people, no matter what they were doing, was physical. So if people are cultivating land, they're walking to the fields. The fields would be a little ways outside of the village. So you're walking to the field or you are baking bread. If you're a baker, you're kneading the dough. That's hard work. You might be out fetching water or caring for animals. You could be cutting hay, processing or foraging for medicinal herbs. So the work is not separate from the body. People's bodies are their means of making their lives. And the work is happening at the pace at which a body can move. So it's a physical human pace. Or if you're plowing, it's at the pace of oxen who are pulling your plows. So the work was physical, and also the fruits of that work were physical. You could see and hold or taste the fruits of your labors. And that is satisfying in a different way than what many people are used to today. So people are absolutely getting a lot of exercise, and that could have been hard on the body sometimes. That's true. But the work was a sane pace, was at a sane pace, and people could see and hold and touch the results of their work and their labor. And it may have been very frustrating to then have to give those crops to the Lord instead of being able to eat them yourselves. But a lot of what people were doing and spending time on in this period were things to make their own life and was labor that they could see blessing themselves and their community. The work for everyone was also social. So whether you're out in the fields or working at a trade in the village, if you're just at your home, you would have been outside most likely. The homes at this time, were pretty dark and they're more for storing things or sleeping or perhaps cooking over a fire, but most people are spending their time outside of the house itself, working on processing food or making clothing or tending to their animals. So the work is done in the fabric of the community. So for better or worse, you're getting a lot of social time and you're having to come to agreements about how you're tending your plot right next to someone else's plot. Where do whose animals get to be out in the meadow eating, whose pigs get to be out under the oak trees eating the acorns. And even if you are selling or trading things at the market or in the village, you are largely, unless you're a traveling merchant, you're selling things or trading things with people that you live among. Okay, so the goods created in a community, by and large, stayed in that community. That's really different than what we see later on in capitalism and what we experience today, which is that a lot of goods are created and then exported out of the community. So if someone where I live in Portland is making something, there's no guarantee that I will, receive what it is they're making or even be able to find or purchase the goods that people are creating in Portland because now we're part of this vast global market. So the work for people in this time period was seasonal, based on the land. It was agricultural, it was physical, it was at a human bodily pace, it was tangible, it was social. And we don't see the same level of management of labor and work that we see later on inside of capitalism. So serfs, especially because they were obligated to work the Lord's land, of course their work was watched and monitored. There are lots of examples of legal skirmishes. There are rules, especially at harvest time, that you're not allowed to harvest anything after daylight because they didn't want anyone stealing other people's crops or the Lord's crops. There were really specific rules around who could go and like glean the fields after the harvest. So poor people in the village or older people in the village were given the chance to go around the fields and glean what was left. But strangers were not invited. You know, if there was someone just coming through, they were really not invited to glean the fields. So there's all kinds of rules and agreements around who gets what and whether or not the work was done satisfactorily. But even serfs were not clocking in or out. You know, I can't remember where this is from now, but I read a quote about workers. I think it was a clergyman or like a steward of an estate. And this person was complaining about how these serfs just roll in late in the morning. They need a long break for lunch. They may or may not come back. Like, really describing these people, even before the Black Death, when we see labor really change, describing these, peoples as, they're not out there trying to be the best or like high potential employees. They're rolling in well after sunrise, doing the bare minimum. They expect lunch. If you don't provide it, they're out of there. So there wasn't the same rigidity of like middle management that we see inside of capitalism or on plantations or in slave systems. That's not to say that things for serfs were great or ideal or that no one was mistreated, but I think there's this myth that serfs and all peasants were absolutely toiling in the fields all day, every day. And I just haven't found evidence that that is the case, real evidence. Of course, again, agriculture is labor intensive, so people would have been out cultivating their own crops for a meaningful amount of time. But when the sun went down, the work was over. And depending on the time of year, there may just not have been that much that was needed to do. So many peasants, those who were not serfs, many peasants did not have a boss. They had to pay taxes like us, for sure. Some of them had to pay rent, but they weren't apprentices forever like many employees are today. These people had homesteads of their own. They set up shops of their own. They had their own trades. Yes, a lot of young people may have apprenticed and learned those trades, but then they would have ideally gone off and been able to start their own trade and be able to support themselves and a family in the village. And an author named David Graeber talked about in one of his books how this apprentice system fell away and how what we have now today is kind of this like unending adolescence where you're constantly employed and your work is dictated by others. You're constantly kind of this apprentice, like beholden to someone else's way of doing things, and that a lot of people are missing the chance to go out on their own and be able to make like real meaningful lives for themselves and dictate their own time, their own labor, see the fruits of their own labor. So sometimes I imagine corporate environments as these like little manors, these little lords' estates where there's a lord and everyone there is an indentured servant rather than, what we see in the Middle Ages, which is a lot of people who have a relative amount of freedom. In this book, The Daily Life of Medieval Times, they say that while life for peasant women wasn't easy by any means, they generally had a lot more freedom and a higher quality of life and autonomy than women in the upper classes. Because again, there's so much work to be done to make a home that there's not the same rigidity around gender roles. And that's something that capitalism changed as history went on. So, I want to highlight some conclusions that I'm pulling this week on this topic. One, I think in the Middle Ages for the peasantry at this time, the amount of work that it takes to run a home was recognized, acknowledged, and supported. So people understood how much time and work it took to grow food, to make clothing, to feed the animals. And for peasants, when the work was over, it was over. So if you're a baker, the bread oven is done for the night. It's dark, can't make any more bread. The sun has gone down, you can't be weeding in the field anymore. And of course, there may have also been more work at home, caring for children or caring for the elderly or clothes that needed to be mended by the fire. But that would have been done in the quiet of your home, maybe with others around, socializing or sharing news and stories around the fire. The work for these people is happening at a cyclical pace. So in harvest times, there was definitely more intense labor required, but also everyone would be out there. And the Lord is providing a feast. There's food. There's like a level of festiveness to the work, and it's time limited. You're working a lot for a set period of time. It's not the same 5 week grind all year, no matter what the sun and the seasons are doing. The work for these people perhaps was not like a creative outlet. Maybe, you didn't feel like being a blacksmith or a dairymaid was really your calling. But there were a lot of things that were different and perhaps more beneficial about work at this time, such as not having to deal with petty middle managers. There was some oversight, especially for like grains. You had to, only certain people could make bread. You kind of had to have a license to do it. Same with ale. So there was some oversight for sure, but you have autonomy over your craft. There are no alarm clocks. You're not clocking in and out. So perhaps even if you're doing work that doesn't feel like your calling, let's say, there is the chance to bring some creative flair to it, to make it your own, to bring some of your giftedness to it. And there was probably, and this is based in real evidence, there was more leisure time for folks in this period. So you could have had time to whittle or carve or, make special medicines or sing, be out in the woods singing and doing things that were enriching and enlivening. Also, this work happened in community. Again, that's not always great. Community can be hard, but there was a web of knowingness. You were known in the village, and there was a web of support potentially around you. That's really different than how a lot of people are working today. And finally, it seems clear that the work people were doing was exercise. Many people were outside all day. They're getting fresh air, they're getting sunlight, their circadian rhythms are synced up to the cycle of the day. There are plants all around, there are animals all around, there are not jets flying overhead or motorcycles crashing down the road. There's bird song, just the song of the land is different. And I'm not saying it was always perfect, but work was happening in alignment with the land and in concert with the land. And there's a lot about that that is appealing to me. So I want to talk now about what this might mean for us today. Again, we can't go back in time and become peasants, and maybe you don't want to. That's okay. But there are definitely some things that we could glean from this material and perhaps could shift things for us as we work this summer and beyond. The first thing I want to say is that capitalism makes the work we have to do at home to sustain ourselves invisible. And capitalism has done this since its emergence and still does by relegating that work to a particular class of people, mostly women, and making that work unpaid and unvalued in this economy. So the idea of working full time outside the home all year round would have been absurd to the peasantry in the Middle Ages. It wouldn't have made sense. well, who's going to take care of your animals or grow your food or wash your clothing? Like all of that has to get done. And that's really important for us to remember that just because this economic system says that the work you do to take care of your kids or cultivate your garden is worthless, doesn't mean it's always been that way or that it is that way. I also think a lot of us are really busy with work, whether it's in the home or outside the home, but that work is not happening in community anymore. So it's lonely. It's lonely busyness. It's also sometimes physical, but largely sedentary. So we're also not exercising all day or moving or, walking to and from the field and the village. Most of us aren't working outside. So we're not really reaping some of the benefits that the European peasantry would have in their labor in terms of movement and fresh air and community. And if we are working outside in physical roles, capitalism has also made those roles precarious and dangerous. And there are a lot of day laborers who are working in the fields or working with their bodies all day who aren't respected and their labor is not valued in this economy. And that is wrong, that it should not be like that. We also have a harder time putting the work down now because we are constantly connected to devices. There's electric lighting. So now there's no excuse to not continue working into the night or early in the morning. And for many of us, our work is not as tangible as the work of this time of work in a more subsistence kind of economy. So it feels never ending and like it's this stream that will never ever stop. So I'm curious what you like about the peasant's experience of work. Is there a certain image or quality or aspect of what I've described today that feels resonant to you, where you feel like, oh, I would like that. I would like to be working in alignment with the seasons, or I'd like to be outside. I would like to be doing my work alongside other people. I would like to work and listen to the birds or listening to the sheep in the field. I also wonder if you might like to experience a greater sense of timelessness this summer, where your life, your labor is not so beholden to the clock. And this may not be possible in your working life, but could it be possible just in the work that you do at home? Instead of rushing to get everything done, could you put a couple clocks away this summer or put down your watch and just see what it's like to kind of move with the daily cycle instead? Maybe you don't set an alarm this summer and see if your body syncs up to a different kind of rhythm. I also wonder if you might feel called to make work more social or more communal. Could you take your work outside or be out in the front yard where there's a chance your neighbor will stop by and say hello? Or could you, do your work on the computer, but it's out, at your back patio or the windows open? Or would you like to get together with people and work beside them? Would that feel good? Could your work be more cyclical this season and into the harvest time? This could be a good time to slow down and recuperate your energy before the harvest period, literally or metaphorically, rather than overdoing it and being at this grind before it's really necessary. And finally, I wonder if you feel like you have a lack of autonomy or if you feel managed constantly in your work. And is there something you could do about that? Could you roll in a little bit late? Could you leave if there's not lunch or whatever it is for you? Could you yeah, like kind of claim your right, your heritage of not being managed, not having to report constantly or ask for permission to go to the dentist or, to leave if you're not feeling well. Where might you want to push back on that restriction a little bit? Or if you work for yourself, are there client expectations that need to shift, especially this summer where you are really not available as much and, finding the ways to be not an apprentice anymore, but your own practitioner, your own craftsperson. This is how it's going to look. So, whatever resonates about the peasant experience of work and labor is where I invite you to consider focusing or making tweaks. But there's one area that I'm going to invite you to focus on this week in our kind of activity ritual portion, which is to appreciate the labor that you exert to make your home. So again, there is so much labor that is intentionally made invisible and unvalued inside of capitalism. So all you have to do to recognize this is to consider all of the work that women mostly historically have done to care for others, to make home, and to make it possible for someone, often a man, to go earn a wage outside of the home. That work has been unpaid, but expected and assumed that it will just be there. That, of course, this person, someone has to be in at the home to care for everyone else. And we're not going to change that overnight. Work inside of the home is a long way off from being paid or recognized as just as valuable as work that is paid. But we can reclaim some of that value and appreciation ourselves. So the work that you do to procure and make food, to clean your space, to repair broken things in your home, to clean your clothing, to tend to plants and animals or other people who share your home, that is really, really important. That labor is sacred. And a lot of us wish we had more time for it, that it wasn't constantly in opposition to the work that we have to do to pay our bills. I know I would like more time to, I don't know, go to the farmer's market or bake healthier foods for my kids or, time to hang the laundry more slowly. But I, maybe like you, have been in this cycle for a very, very long time of prioritizing the work that is paid, in part because I have to. I have to earn an income to afford this home. And some of it is my own choice that I have this kind of internalized capitalism that values that work more than, the work of vacuuming or dusting or cleaning or making my space nice. So, wherever you land in relationship to this idea, I encourage you just to hold as sacred the work that you do to make your home and to sustain yourself. For the medieval peasant, there was a lot of work, of course, as there always is, even today. But there wasn't this dichotomy between paid work or work for the Lord and homework, with one being more valuable than the other. That came later with capitalism, and it's exhausting. It's exhausting that we constantly have to navigate, each of us in our own personal ways, how much time and energy we have to just live and make life, and how much time and energy we have and can spend on earning an income. And that means that most of us are working way more than the European peasantry in the Middle Ages because we're doing paid work and homework. We have electric lighting that again makes night shifts and work into the evening possible, more than rest. We have these household appliances now that are said to make life easier, but really they've just made us more available to work. The leisure time that we keep expecting from technology just isn't showing up. European peasants had more leisure time than we do today. And we're in this place, this culture with an absolutely bonkers speed to life and omnipresence of communication that again makes it hard to be able to be present with and savor or appreciate the slow, down on the ground labor of caring for ourselves, our bodies, the bodies of others that we love, the bodies of our homes, our gardens. So this summer, I hope you will appreciate and savor the work you do to make your home. And if you can, to play around with prioritizing that work over the work you do to make an income. Again, could you ghost the paid work a little bit so that you do have more time to tend to your space or to your body or to the care you want to give to others? That work is the work of life. And it syncs up nicely to the zodiac sign that we're in right now, which is Cancer. And Cancer's esoteric phrase in esoteric astrology is, I will build a lighted house and therein dwell. So your home this summer is kind of like your crab's shell. The symbol of Cancer is the crab. And we always get this chance every early summer to check in with our shell, with the outer reality that our soft inner body is living in. Is my home a place that is spacious and beautiful enough for me to be myself, to be as expansive as I want to be right now? Is my daily structure and schedule the kind of shell that I need right now? Is my car functioning or my bike functioning well enough that I can move through my life in the way that I need? So in Cancer season, we're playing around with this external, internal dynamic, and we get a chance to refresh our shell, our outer life, so that our inner life can be soft and sweet, but also as big and strong as we want it to be. So, in some way, I hope you will tend to appreciate and savor the work that you're doing to tend to your shell this summer, whether that feels like it's your home or your outdoor space or your daily rhythms or schedule, and to create structures that feel spacious enough to you, that feel good, and to remember that just because that's not valued work inside of capitalism has no bearing on its true value. And the people of the Middle Ages living as peasants would have known that and resonated with that and encouraged you to consider, that tending to your home is really, really important. I hope today's episode felt enlivening and refreshing to you in some way. Next time, we're going to be talking about wild waters and the experience of water among the European peasantry, whether it was as their source of washing laundry or washing the body or drinking water. And I want to explore what that might show us about relating to water this summer ourselves. So until then, I hope you take such good care, and I'll see you on the other side.